Hi, I'm Susan Freeman. Welcome back to our Propertyshe podcast series brought to you by Mishcon de Rare in association with the London Real Estate Forum, where I get to interview the key influencers in the world of real estate and the built environment. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Basil Demeroutis. Basil is managing partner of purpose-driven real estate investment firm FORE Partnership. The firm has a portfolio of over 1 million square feet in the UK and Western Europe, spanning offices, mixed use, and residential sectors. FORE's holistic approach brings together environmental, sustainability, social impact, and an authentic appreciation of how people live, work, and interact, turning these drivers of profitability for investors and tenants. Prior to founding FORE, Basil was a partner at Capricorn Investment Group, the family office of Jeff Skoll, eBay founder, overseeing global real estate and serving on the firm's investment committee. Previously, he was managing partner at property fund Jargonant Partners and spent the early part of his career in investment banking. As part of FORE's commitment to driving solutions to carbon reduction and making positive social impact in the built environment, FORE became a B Corporation in 2020, one of the only investment management firms in the property sector, and indeed the wider private equity community, to be a B Corp. It has also made an industry-leading pledge to make its business and buildings net zero carbon by 2025. And now we're going to hear from Basil Demeroutis about real estate development with a purpose. Basil, welcome, and great to see you today. Where are you calling in from?
I'm actually in my office in Mayfair here in London.
Okay, and I believe you're originally from Canada, and you grew up in Toronto. How did you get into real estate, and how did you get to London?
Yeah. I did grow up in Canada, but I've lived here in London for the last 22 years or so. So I do feel like it's my adopted home, and my kids speak with funny British accents, so it probably means I'm here to stay. So how did I get into property? Well, I mean, I think it really, like a lot of people in my position, it probably started at a fairly early stage. You know, I've always been a tinkerer, and I as a young kid, I was always taking things apart and trying to put them back together again, and that's from making go-karts to even taking apart the family television to try to figure out why it wasn't working. Eventually, actually, my first job was in construction. I had to actually lie about my age. I was only 15 at the time, and I ended up being a laborer on a construction site. And so they gave me a broom and told me to go sweep over there in the corner and work my way across the building. And so I had exposure to construction and real estate at an early age, and so I guess I was exposed to it from a young person. Eventually, when I decided to go to university, I was torn between being an architect or an engineer, and I actually really desperately wanted to be an architect, but I couldn't draw to save my life, and so I applied to engineering school and got into engineering, became an engineer. But went to Cornell, and there's always this great rivalry between the engineers and the architects. And there was this once-a-year event where the architects would build these great floats and parade them through the campus, and the engineers would throw rotten tomatoes and eggs at them. So there was this great rivalry between architects and engineers, and I think I was always a little bit jealous of my friends in architecture school. Eventually, after graduating, I went to Wall Street and spent some time in investment banking. Did about eight years in New York in asset financing and real estate finance. Cut my teeth on Wall Street, and then moved over here in 1998 to the UK with Bear Stearns. May it long rest in peace. Venerable name. And then decided to leave banking in 2001, 2002, and having seen over the years so many great property companies and property investors like Saul Kersner, and did financings for people like Planet Hollywood and others. And I saw these amazing luminaries in the field firsthand, having raised capital for them and taken them public. And I thought, I could have a go at that too. And then ultimately left banking to start life as a private equity real estate investor in the early 2000s.
Well, it sounds like a sort of pretty good way into real estate. And when you started your company, I think in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
What was the vision? Because you obviously wanted to do things sort of slightly differently, having seen so many aspects of real estate. What was your thinking when you set things up?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of a problem solver, when I looked at the real estate industry, I felt like there was something wrong with it, something broken about it, and I had spent some time, as I say, as a GP running a property fund with two other partners focused on Germany. Then I went in-house into a family office for one of the two eBay founders, where had run his real estate investments, but also got exposure to all of the amazing things he was doing with his capital on a philanthropic basis. And I've always felt like, again, as an engineer with an engineering mindset, that every problem has a solution. It's very closed-ended. At the bottom of the page, there's an answer that you put in a box. And I felt like the problem with the real estate industry was a fewfold. First of all, I think funds weren't particularly aligned with investors' values and what they believed in, and they weren't necessarily serving investors' best interests from a financial standpoint, but also, more importantly, from an investment strategy standpoint. And when I looked across the horizon and to see what was available out there for us to deploy our capital into, there really wasn't anything at that time that was really tackling these problems around climate change, social impact, and offering up, I think, a better, bolder vision of what the future of real estate could look like. And so I set it up.
And the name FORE, I think it stands for Family Office Real Estate. So what is the connection? Your investors' family offices?
Yeah, when we set it up, again, I've set it up having been a partner at a family office, and so the idea was that we were investing along the values and the principles of family capital. But I think over the years, it's conveniently also evolved into the future of real estate, and as we've added more and more families to our portfolio of investors that we work for, foundations, endowments, and indeed now some institutional capital. We've really realized that these problems that we're trying to solve are universal problems that every investor faces, not just private families. And what we were really defining was, what does the future of real estate look like?
That's a very good question. We'll answer that one a little bit later, I think. So you've recently attained B Corporation accreditation, which is at the moment still very unusual for a UK real estate company. And I think, to my mind, a lot of what you have been doing since you set up the company has really involved providing social value. Environment is important. So I think it would be useful for our listeners, first of all, to talk about what B Corp accreditation is, and why you think it's important.
Yeah. So B Corp accreditation is a system that looks at your business holistically, end to end. So from our perspective as a real estate investor, it looks at our buildings and what our buildings do, but also our business and what we do as a business. And it looks at it really in a, as I say, quite a holistic way, from an environmental sustainability standpoint, from social value, from how you treat your staff and employees, how you procure things. And it's really, I think, the only standard out there that I know of that really takes both the social value piece and the environmental sustainability piece and the governance, the whole ESG equation, and blends it into one. I think what's particularly interesting about it is that it as part of the process, you put into your company charter and bylaws a commitment to act on behalf of people and planet at the same level as profit, not above, but certainly not below, but in parallel. And those three principles govern everything that you do. I think that's the second thing that's interesting about it, is that there's this sort of overarching governance that sits there behind the scenes, and it's not necessarily prescriptive, like you have to have a desk within 7 meters from a window, as you do in BREEAM, or water stations every X meters, as you might do in WELL, but it's an overarching set of principles that's supposed to govern how you conduct your business every day in every aspect. And I think that's what's especially attractive about it, is that it's really deeply infused into the governance of the firm, and indeed the DNA of the firm.
And was it a difficult process? How long did it take you?
Yeah, it took about a year. As you said, I think we had been doing this for quite a while. And when I was at Capricorn, the family office, I think we became a B Corp there in 2014. And we, through the foundation, the school foundation, we were instrumental in helping support B Labs, the company behind B Corp, early days. So I've been pretty familiar with the process for a while. But even still, even though you're doing these things, to kind of ingrain them in your these processes in your daily life, and document them, and make sure that you're actually doing what you say you're doing anecdotally. It does take a little while, and so it took us about a year ultimately to get it.
And going through this process where you're looking in a very granular way at every aspect of your business, did you find out things that you didn't know about your business? Did it help your understanding of what you were doing?
For sure. I mean, we're a small business. We've got a portfolio of about 1 million square feet of real estate, kind of a gross asset value of around 700 million. So we're kind of a large end of the small guys, small end of the medium firms, and so we don't have a lot of things, resources to sit and write policies and document everything that we're doing. We have great stories, and we're doing things rigorously and in a way that's really, I think, profoundly changing the way we think about property. But if you asked us 12 months ago, like, to pull out a piece of paper that showed what our procurement policy was, or how we think about very granular things around HR. I mean, we didn't have them, or certainly didn't have them updated. So we spent a lot of time, I think, institutionalizing the things that we were already doing, and making sure that they survive the test of time, and that we can set the foundations for a bright future.
And I mean, it seems to me one of the sort of more challenging things for a property company in going through the process is that the supply chain, and making sure that your suppliers are also following the same principles and values that you do. I mean, that must be quite difficult to do.
Yeah, it's getting easier. I think it depends on where you look. Obviously, within real estate, we're touching huge volumes of things every day, from the number of people to the number of things that we're procuring. I mean, you think of it, even a relatively modest sized firm like ours, we're running 40, 50, 60 million pound projects. I mean, these are the size of small companies. So the procurement decisions that we make have an impact, and they matter. And I think really, where I think we really excel is looking deeply into those activities, and really trying to understand, where does our steel come from? If we make a decision to buy recycled content steel, does that mean it comes from overseas, for example, as opposed to here in the UK? And what does that mean for road miles, or for jobs, or social value that you might destroy in Scunthorpe versus the environmental benefit you get from recycled steel? I mean, I think these are the kinds of procurement decisions that, as a property investor, you really have to get into. And I always liken it like being a chef. And fine, we can all probably go to the grocery store and buy some ingredients and put together a meal that satisfies our hunger. But I think the best chefs really understand where their ingredients come from, the difference between tomato A, tomato B, when the right type of year is to buy a particular type of produce, Um, I don't know how you could be in the kitchen of real estate without really understanding exactly where the ingredients come from. And I think that's really where we really try to excel.
I think that is a great analogy, and I think it's something that property companies are going to have to be thinking a lot more about. With
It's tricky, you know, when you've got big portfolios, and again, I think our size is sometimes a disadvantage, but sometimes it's an advantage. You know, we've got about a dozen assets, let's say 1 million square feet, so we could be pretty nimble, and we want to make a decision about procuring something in a particular way. We could decide around the table. It takes us 5 minutes. If you're a large REIT that's got public shareholders and large legacy portfolios, and the decisions that you make may have implications not only on the asset you're involved with, but more broadly, you've got a complex decision tree. I think it's complicated, and you know, I'm a big admirer of some of the people you've had on your show. I listened to Harry Handelsman's interview with you recently, and I mean, these are real luminaries across the industry, and I think they were active during a period of time where they could actually take decisions, and I think universally they're all so into the details. Harry's, I thought it was fascinating, you know, not only about the buildings, but even you know, his journey to work. He had it down to like the minute. You'd say he'd arrive on the platform 30 seconds before the train, and you know, he'd catch that train, and it would be 9 minutes. I mean, details matter in real estate, and I think and when you can have that decision making power vested in people who believe passionately about what they're doing, and have the ability to make decisions that actually can maybe not necessarily seem economically the best ones within a large corporate environment sense, but they make those decisions anyways because they're believers, that I think you can really foster change.
It's interesting that you mention Harry Handelsman and the journey to work, because I realized that he was the original 15-minute city man at a time where we were all happily, you know, commuting. He was the one that was saying, you know, some 30 years ago, you know, why don't people live near, you know, where they're working? But I think I mean, the whole real estate sector is going to have to be thinking, you know, very carefully about sustainability, because with real estate and built environment being responsible for some 40% of global carbon emissions, you know, it's not going to go away, and there's going to be an increasing focus on the sector. So, I mean, going back to BCorps, do you think you'll be seeing many other property companies following this path? And I think one of the big questions for them is, you know, will it add to the bottom line? You know, they may want to do the right thing, but they also need to know that you know, at the end of the day, it's going to be good for their business as well.
I think we're at a critical juncture in history, and I think we all probably, it's maybe slightly overused perspective, but I think this is really true. And whether you think that some people call it the fourth industrial revolution, or this moment in time, the Build Back Better, the new normal, or the next normal, or the better normal, I think we're sitting here at a point where we really need to take a massive mental leap forward, particularly in the property industry, where we think of real estate really as not part of the climate problem, but really as part of the climate solution, where we can deeply integrate the S of ESG in a way that's coherent, and not just some sort of a bolt-on feature in what we're doing. You know, I think previously property was viewed as being a kind of a way to, or we measure people's productivity and enhance productivity through solutions that we deliver to property. I think now we're thinking about it in terms of how do we create better fulfillment, and as a nexus between government and the third sector and business, to deliver long-term solutions to deeply entrenched systemic problems. We think about our problems that we're trying to solve around authenticity, around around all sorts of different things that as property people we would never talk about before. I mean, these are sort of psychological human characteristics that you wouldn't necessarily hear around the lunch table at Bellamy's 20 years ago. It would be really about deals and leases and did you get land this one and did you land that one and what was your profit on turn on this. I think it's changed, and I think it's the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't think that we can put it back in. So whether it's B Corp or different certifications or just a different way of doing business, this conscious capitalism, build back better movement, I think is here to stay. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see in these visionaries in the property industry that really were focused on design. I mean really bold visions around design, and again others besides Harry, Simon Silver, Derwent. I mean, I don't think Derwent's been such a fascinating company to watch. All the detail in the design is absolutely unbelievable. But I think we're seeing a transformation now, and the leaders of tomorrow will be just as equally passionate and focused about green, and we sort of need the next generation of leaders to come up and take those ideals about being passionate about delivery of space and greenify it. So we need the green Derwent, we need the green cellar, we need the green Manhattan loft company. I'm fascinated to see some of these companies now start to emerge.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And are you seeing sort of younger generation sort of real estate entrepreneurs coming through with that really at the forefront of what they're trying to do?
Yeah, look, I think it's I think we are in our own business and the people we've hired here and in other similar firms across London and indeed Europe. We definitely see it. And I think we'll be fascinated to see the leaders of tomorrow really start to emerge, and sort of who ends up being the torch carrier for this new vision of real estate. I hope it's us.
Yes, I hope so. So I think it would be great if we actually talk about some of the specifics and how some of these principles play out in your portfolio. So just looking at Windmill Green, which is Manchester, and I think it's only his second building in Manchester to receive a BREEAM outstanding rating. And I was looking at the website and it says this isn't your run-of-the-mill office block. So perhaps you can tell our listeners how are you doing things differently? What are you doing there?
Yeah, well, I think we could talk about tons of features that we've put into the building, and I think those are easy to understand. And from the solar panels that we put on the roof that are the highest efficiency ever panels that have been put on buildings in Manchester and perhaps even the UK, that come from the front row seat I've had to the new economy and the tech revolution. Given my connections to Silicon Valley, we've been able to source them, and we understand where that industry is heading and where innovation is happening there. To the materiality that we've put in and the recycled content that we've used in the materials. It's got the most amazing green wall that you may have seen with 5,000 plants that wrap inside, outside. Innovations in glass, cement, steel. So lots of things we've done. Has the best cycling facilities in Manchester, voted by CycleScore. Digital resilience, it's WiredScore Platinum. So I think all these things are features, and there's a long laundry list of them. And indeed, I think, in my view, we get to, you've noted we've made a commitment to be net zero carbon across our portfolio by 2025. And I think you get there within a building by hundreds of small little innovations. And there's no silver bullet. I mean, there can be sometimes if you've got large amounts of space and you can drill boreholes and come up with some sort of single innovative defining technology that helps get you there. But I think more often than not, especially if we're trying to address the every building on every street problem, the 80% of the buildings that are already built that are still going to be standing by 2050. I think it's these hundreds of small initiatives. And indeed, we've gotten to the point at Windmill Green, for example, where we've reduced the carbon footprint of the building by 85%, which I think is a pretty astonishing achievement. Um, but I think it's also done in a way that's authentic. And I think as we, as all of us, but really as consumers, become more attuned to what's what good looks like, I think we could smell something that's disingenuous a mile away. And so, particularly in this building, when you walk in and you may not even notice it, but it's the snap decisions that you take when you walk into a space, the volume of light, the materiality, the texture of something, the smell, the sound. Again, these things all go into creating an authentic experience. And I think that's where the magic happens in that particular building, that it's all integrated so well and in a way that you don't necessarily even see it. And I think that's what makes that building great.
So the building, it was an old office building, wasn't it? And you
Yeah.
chose to retrofit it and extend it when you could have just. It probably would have been easier to just knock it down and start again. But again, this raises an interesting question, because it seems generally to be better to repurpose if you can and use the frame of an existing building. But is it more expensive to do that?
I don't think so. I think that overall, I think sustainability clearly adds something to the equation, and we estimate that probably somewhere between 1% and 4% extra cost to do something in a way that's really pushing the boundaries on sustainability versus, say, something that's just clearing the minimum hurdle. Um, I think retrofitting is such a key, important factor that we do really need to solve as an industry. And genuinely, it's great to build these, massive totems to ourselves as a society, as companies, as individuals. But at the end of the day, if we're going to solve the climate crisis, there's an urgency in our mission that we need to solve it literally, street by street, house by house, in kind of guerrilla warfare sort of approach. And just blanket knocking everything down and rebuilding it again isn't going to work. It's just not. And so we feel deeply committed to retrofitting first, um, and to developing this toolkit which allows us to do it in as economically a way as possible. Windmill Green is a great example. We've achieved between 34 and 36 pounds a square foot in that building. I mean, best rents, grade A, knockdown, brand new building, 37.50. So we're knocking on the door of prime grade A rents in a building where we spent half as much money and half as much time, and we've had better leasing velocity than some of the big buildings. So I think there's a turning point in the economic analysis and argument. Uh, Another great example is our CADWorks building in Glasgow. I was just up there for the topping out ceremony earlier this week. We actually made the change midstream when we were already on site to take gas out of the building and convert it to all electric. And after a lot of hemming and hawing and late nights sitting around big tables with the team, we actually saved 70,000 pounds in taking the gas out of the building. So it's not true to say it always costs more. It can, but if you're into the details, I think you could find paths to sustainability that actually are cost savings.
And are you finding that when you're letting your buildings, that potential tenants are now asking lots of questions about carbon footprint, sustainability, and all these things which they may not have asked, even a couple of years ago?
I think they are. I think it's starting to become. To be fair, I think it's there's a sort of a minimum standard now that's being achieved. So I think many buildings that people would go to would satisfy that requirement for occupiers. But it's definitely it's super high up on the list of questions that they ask. I think when we get into the detail with tenants and those that are well informed and that want to know more about, where does the electricity come from and what kinds of offsets, the extent you're offsetting, are you buying? Are they preventing deforestation, or are they tree planting? Are they here in the UK, or are they abroad? what kind of technology is actually embedded in the building. They're starting to become pretty well informed consumers, and so they're asking lots and lots of questions around ESG, and to really try to suss out who are delivering authentic solutions to the environmental sustainability question, and not just putting together a hodgepodge collection of, of features that just kind of paper over the problem.
And you referred to becoming net zero in 2025. I mean, that is just 4 years away, and that is one of the more ambitious targets I've heard. I mean, how are you going to achieve that?
Yeah, a lot of sleepless nights. I think, as I think, it sounded like that was a long time from now when we did it. But as I keep seeing the clock ticking forward, with we're pretty impatient about making sure that we achieve those goals. As I said, we can be pretty nimble about it. So we're a smaller firm, and we can make decisions quickly, and we can take decisions that, again, on the surface of it, may not necessarily seem economic or have payback periods, but we know that we're able to achieve on the back end higher rents and lower cap rates. I just think that these commitments, 2050, 2035, that I hear others making, 2030 is as you know, is the UK GBC target. They're great, but I think that our competitors who say 2035, 2040, it's just not good enough, Susan. I mean, honestly, the problem and the urgency is here. Just this week, we passed 420 million parts per 420 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, highest ever recorded levels. We're halfway between pre-industrialized levels and the level at which it will tip over the scales at more than 2 degrees warming. I mean, I don't know how you could sit here as someone who's responsible for 40% of that. I mean, we are responsible for 40% of that in our position, and just say I'm going to kick the can down the road, and in 15 years' time I'll have a solution. It's not responsible, and we feel like we need to do it like right now. And from a competitive standpoint, it's great. If people want to make that decision in 10 years' time or 15 years' time from now, that's fine by me, because we'll have a 15-year head start. And I'll remind you that from the day the car was first rolled off the assembly line to the day cars outnumbered horses was 12 years in the U.S. So in a decade, things can change like a flash, and things that seem impossible, improbable, illogical, unachievable, all of a sudden are there on your doorstep. And I think that's the moment in time where we are now, is where we're seeing this rapid acceleration towards a low carbon economy. And I think people who do kick the can down the road are going to be caught flat-footed.
Well, it's certainly interesting what you say about it happening quickly, because it almost seemed that at the beginning of last year, as we went into January 2020, people suddenly seemed to wake up to the problem. And it was only about then that we started hearing about property sector being responsible for 40% of carbon emissions. And I'm not sure why it took so long for us to get there. But then COVID kicked in, and I think there was concern that with the focus on COVID and getting out of the pandemic, that sustainability would go back on the back burner again. But fortunately, it hasn't. And I think a lot of people have seen COVID as a bit of a wake-up call, to what needs to be done. But I mean, in terms of reaching this net zero target, I think your Tower Bridge Court development in London is going to be it's going to be net zero office building. Yes. I mean, is it one of the first in London to be net zero?
I think there's been a number of them now that have been announced, and whether it's the first or one of the first or top 10, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure it really matters. I think what's matters to us is that we can use that as an exemplar to retrofit, deep retrofit. We're keeping the frame of the building, so we're keeping all of that embedded carbon in the frame and in the building, adding a couple floors and recladding it. It's going to be all electric again. and some real cool innovations around materials and things that we're using in the building to try to reduce the embedded carbon as well as the operational carbon. It's also going to be targeting WELL Platinum. So if we're able to achieve a BREEAM Outstanding, WELL Platinum, EPCA, I think it will truly be one of a few at that point, handful of buildings in the world to have achieved all of those things. And our goal is to really just prove that it's possible and to prove that it's economically profitable. And we're not a charity. We're doing things here because we see powerful ways of driving financial profit by solving some of these deeply entrenched systemic global problems at scale. And I think that's the key thing that we need to really achieve here is at scale. And so I think that the Tower Bridge Court will be a great example of that. And again, there are others done by very clever property firms as well. And so we'd be very pleased to be part of that club when it gets delivered at the end of 2022, early 2023.
And I'm intrigued by the flex with purpose that you've got planned for Tower Bridge Court. What is I know what flex is, but what is flex with purpose?
Yeah, well, I think it speaks to really the integration of the S and the E. And I think when you mentioned tenants and their quests around environmental sustainability, I think they're equally stuck in trying to figure out what their social purpose is. I mean, look, I'm an engineer, I'm a property guy. Like, talking about purpose and happiness and fulfillment and self-actualization, these aren't words that are common in the property vernacular. Like, we talk about concrete and steel and leases and rent reviews, very clinical things. But purpose, I think that's what it's all about. I mean, we've been doing a lot of thinking and work around happiness. And I think, if you talk about people's life goals and why they do things, and whether it's they want to have a job, or they want to make more money, or they want to get married, or have a family, or friendships. I mean, there's always another why behind that. So I want to get a job so I can make more money. But happiness, there's no next derivative as to why, and fulfillment, and these kind of very high order things that we want to achieve in our life are the ultimate pinnacle. And I think purpose and is a way to drive towards happiness, fulfillment, self-actualization. And I think it's critically important that we have an open discussion about that in a very sort of non-property way, because ultimately these are the problems that are faced by our tenants and their staff and the communities that we serve as property developers. And ultimately, I think people are going to value property that has a positive impact on driving social outcomes, social purpose, happiness, and fulfillment.
So how in practical terms does it work? So if I went into sort of flex space in your project, how would that help me with providing purpose for my business?
Yeah, well, we're looking to partner with operators, or indeed drive something ourselves in what we're doing that actually looks to support businesses that either have a social purpose and that are looking to drive that through their business, or are know that they need to find one and that they want to have our help on that journey. And by collecting like-minded companies together that really have a common goal around purpose, I think that can create a community of self-supporting, self-sustaining firms and indeed individuals that are on this journey together, and that ultimately come together for some sort of higher benefit.
And you mentioned happiness, and I agree that's not necessarily something that one has in the past looked at as a property developer. But I was looking at different definitions of social value, because obviously a lot of property companies are now having to talk about what social value they they're providing. And I saw somebody gave the definition that social value is making even one person happy, which gets us back to happiness. But it's an interesting interesting topic for real estate developers to be thinking about. And I noticed on Tower Bridge Court, I think you're using Give My View to communicate with the community, and I was particularly interested in that because I have interviewed Savannah de Savary for the podcast, and how is that helping you to engage with people to find out what makes them happy and what they want from the project?
No, it's a great platform, and I think we need to find ways to connect with our communities more directly. I think too often there's this adversarial relationship between property owners, developers, and the community, be it the obvious ones where you're making a lot of noise and dust and construction, and and you're disrupting the neighbors. But even more psychologically, we always feel like this landlord-tenant relationship implies some sort of superiority, the landlord and the tenant. And I think we need to change that, and we need to do that by actually starting by listening. And any kind of technology tool that helps us to listen, I think I'm all for it. And so we try to, of course, listen to the vocal minority; they're important. But we try to also listen to the silent majority and really understand what they're doing. Again, as a problem solver, I do believe that every problem has a solution, but we also need to make sure that we're solving the right problem. I mean, Einstein has this great quote. He once said, "If I was given an hour to solve a problem that, in order to save the world, I'd spend 59 minutes figuring out what the problem was, 1 minute solving it." So it's an eloquent little quote, but it's true. I mean, we just sit there sometimes as property developers and impose some sort of solution on the community without necessarily listening. Tools like Give My View, I think, are a great way to connect when it's and use technology for a bit of social good.
And do you find that by using that platform, you are able to reach the younger generation? Because historically, the vocal minority have tended to be, retired people who've got the time to come to, meetings in church halls. But this seems to be like a really good way of engaging the next generation.
It does. I totally agree. And Tower Bridge Court, for example, we've carved out about 4,000 square foot of space, so not insignificant some of the building, and we're calling it an urban village hall, and we're going to co-curate that space with the community for a good chunk of the year. So what would people like to see there, and how do you find out? How do you reach them? Again, this is where my background helps, because I've spent a fair amount of my last 20 years focused on social enterprise, social entrepreneurs, the social impact side of the world. And so we spend a fair amount of time really trying to reach out to the community groups to understand, is skills training an issue, or is it really more about jobs, or are there language issues that we need to try and help solve? Like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then go and solve it.
And are you surprised by, any of the responses that you're getting? Because I suppose you go into these, into a development, and you think you know what the community should want. But I just wondered whether you're getting replies that weren't exactly what you were expecting.
Yeah, no, we always get interesting responses, and I tend to try to read a lot of them to try to get a sense myself of what people are looking for. They're rich and varied, and some are really quite granular and specific. But it's a pretty diverse sort of set of responses that you end up getting on these things.
And you were talking about the relationship between a problem and solution, and that is so true of the emerging prop tech sector. And one of the concerns is there are a lot of solutions out there, but they don't necessarily deal with a problem that anybody feels is a problem or a pain point. I mean, how do you see that in the sort of prop tech that you're introducing into your buildings?
Yeah, completely. I mean, look, I think if you raise your hand on social media and Twitter and LinkedIn these days, and you're sort of you just try to put pause on the whole, office is dead, technology is going to save us. I mean, you really get your head shot. So but I'm not one to sit idly idly by. I mean, I've spent a fair amount of my life really at the deeply integrated with people who are creating software and technology solutions that scale to some pretty complicated problems. And we were C-round investors in Tesla when I was at the family office, and have fostered innovation in battery technology. So I mean, I'm a technologist. I'm an engineer, so I get it. But at the same time, I think we have to remember that there's a slightly darker side to technology. And if you were to kind of look over the last, 15 years or so that Facebook's been around, and Instagram and Twitter, and these technology solutions that we've heard these stories before, haven't we? That these are going to create communities and foster deep connections across the miles, and engender a whole new breed of interpersonal relationships that would never be possible before. Have they? I mean, I think we need to pause and ask the question whether they have or not, because at the same time as we've seen the rise of these, particularly in social media platforms, technology platforms, we've seen falling life expectancy in the U.S., falling happiness. Actually, if you look at happiness in the U.S., 1950 to today, happiness hasn't risen, hasn't changed endpoint to endpoint in a time of unbelievable technology and innovation and wealth creation and the rest. We've seen rising suicide rates over the last 15 years, greater social isolation. And someone has to really reflect on the fact that it's not without a modicum of irony that these platforms that were there to designed to connect us have actually had exactly the opposite effect in many cases. So again, I'm not anti these things. I use it. We use it in our building. We're deep believers in technology. In our office here, we've got the whole thing spammed with sensors. I could tell you about CO2 levels and occupancy sensors and the rest. But let's just remember that there's a dark side to this, and we need to solve for that as much as we do for the innovation piece.
And do you think that what's happened over the last year, with COVID and a succession of lockdowns, is going to cause people to have a bit of a reset on, what they want, from their lives? Are cities going to change? Are we going to carry on sort of like living more locally, or are we going to bounce back? I mean, how do you see things happening?
Yeah, how can it not change? I mean, I'm a firm believer in that change is coming. It's probably coming quicker than we think. I think if you look back again over time, I'm a big student of history, and I think you look at these moments. I think that we tend to polarize the outcomes in the midst of these things. So there's the work from home crowd. We're never going back to the office, and there's the ostriches that have their head buried in the sand. I think the truth lies in the middle. I think there'll be some sort of a mixed model. Whether it's 2 days a week in the office, or 3 days, or 5 days. Some companies will adopt 100% work from home. Some will say, no way, you've got to come into the office. I think we've realized that in this period of social isolation that we need human-to-human interaction. And as wonderful as these tools are, and as great as it is to see you, I'd love to be on the tiles at MIPIM with you again, like we were 10 years ago, and sharing a glass of champagne at some random party. Like you can't replicate that, and no manner of Zoom drinks and fancy dress evenings can replicate that. So I do think that we need to come together. Now, I know you're a big fan of the word collaboration, but so I'm gonna call you out on it, because I think we've banned the word collaboration now in our office. It's sort of it's no longer allowed to be used. I think people throw it out there that we need to come back to the office to have collaboration, and I think it's cutting to the answer without really understanding like what it is. Okay, so how are you collaborating? Are you just like pushing all the desks to the corner like you're having some sort of high school dance, and then everyone's going to magically collaborate in the middle? No, that's not how collaboration happens. Collaboration happens when you create safe spaces for people where their opinions can be heard, where their opinions can be valued, where they feel like they're in a trusted, safe environment. So let's talk about that. And how do you create that? We're not creating collaboration. We're creating the environment in which people feel safe, valued, and that their contribution matters.
I'm glad you raised that, because I was looking at one of the articles where whole number of property companies were talking about why they felt it necessary to get everybody back to the office, and the word collaboration sort of came up in just about every comment. So it does make you sort of sit back and say, okay, how is this going to work? But it is quite interesting actually how people have been able to collaborate over Zoom and Teams. And one of my questions is, that works to a certain extent, but how many Zoom meetings do you have to have with somebody to build up the level of trust in the relationship that you would have if you had if you met somebody on a regular basis? I'm not sure how the trust word works in relation to remote meetings.
Completely. And I think people, there's been lots written on it, and without wanting to really go over too much old ground, but I think we need to think about the kind of social capital that we have in the bank. Like, you and I know each other, so we've got social capital, and I could call you up and we don't necessarily need to be in the same room together, or people we know really, really well, or colleagues, or, but at some point the bank of social capital, you keep making withdrawals and then you're out. And so you need to recharge. You need to recharge that. And so I think, particularly for people in the younger parts of their careers, as many have written about, it's a disaster, and I mean genuine disaster for them. So I think we do need to bring people back. We need to have that. And then there are just things that you can't do over Zoom. You talk again about these higher order purposes that we're trying to, all of us trying to now achieve, like altruism and these sorts of things. I mean, how do you do that over in a virtual sense? I mean, I think they're very complicated social issues, and I think that's why I really powerfully believe that as property owners and property developers, we need to be as much as psychologists, anthropologists, human behavioralists, as we do just boring property people as we were 20 years ago. And I think that genie's again out of the bottle, and I think there's no going back on that either.
And do you think, as a sector, real estate needs to be doing more to get some of these positive messages across? Because clearly things are changing in a big way. Because the BPF perception survey, which is now a couple of years ago, showed that only 20 to 27% of the public had a positive view of the real estate sector. Should we all be doing more to try and change that by changing the way we work?
Completely. I mean, I think we need to be on the front foot, and again, not that many people are coming out advocating for the office or advocating for property more generally. I mean, property is where all this magic happens. It's where you get married. It's where you are born. It's where you get educated. It's where you fall in love. It's where you fall out of love. It's literally, it's where economic activity takes place. It's where works of art are created. I mean, this all happens inside the four walls of a building, and to think that those shape and format and color and configuration of those four walls doesn't somehow have an impact, positive impact, hopefully on these sorts of things. I think it's a mistake, and we need to really be advocating for the positive contribution that we can make. And it's also, when you think around innovation, I think of innovation in building materials and how we're going to solve the climate crisis by driving carbon out of big problematic and hard to abate sectors like concrete and steel. And these are solutions that are coming out of the property sector. It's coming, demand pull from firms like ours that are saying to manufacturers, hey, no, you can't manufacture that product like you used to before, because that's not good enough for us. And so we are driving innovation, and we are driving positivity, and I think we have a positive contribution to make to purpose, to happiness, to fulfillment, and all these sorts of things. And we need to be unapologetic about advocating for that.
I think that's a great message, and a good place to finish. And I love that expression, properties where magic happens. I think we need to get that message out. I think that's great. So Basil, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in real life again very soon.
Pleasure. Thank you, Susan.
Well, it was really great hearing from Basil, who is leading the charge on socially responsible property development. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please join us for the next Propertyshe podcast interview coming very soon. The Propertyshe podcast is brought to you by Mishcon de Rare in association with the London Real Estate Forum, and can be found at mishcon.com/propertyshe, along with all our interviews and programme notes. The podcasts are also available to subscribe to on your Apple Podcast app and on Spotify and whatever podcast app you use. Do continue to subscribe and let us have your feedback and comments, and most importantly, your suggestions for future guests. And of course, you can continue to follow me on Twitter @Propertyshe and on LinkedIn for a regular commentary on all things real estate, prop tech, and the built environment.